Sorry, man. I forgot to start the recording at the beginning of the meeting, so I had to interrupt there.
Yeah.
No worries. So no, I don't recall there being a specific reason as to why it's not included.
Given all the other.
It may have been exactly for the reason that we're discussing is, when the RO district was first developed, it is residential office and, drive-throughs and, the amount of traffic that a bank would generate back then may have been something that was viewed as being not compatible with being adjacent to a residential district. Today, they generate, significantly less traffic. So, I think it's up to us to have a view on whether or not we think it is applicable today. How we got here is how we got here.
Based on David's comment and the county's comment, Claire's comment, I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Well, change it to a financial institution instead of a bank. Since it's not going to be any, outside drive up, deposit money, it's not going to be tellers inside, but be exchanging money.
We can look at that, but it might be cleaner to amend the ordinance to actually the term financial institution exists elsewhere in the ordinance as well. Sometimes it's called a bank, and other times it's called a financial institution. No definition anywhere as to if there's any differentiation between the two or what the definition of a bank is. Nor are there any list of uses. It's just kind of what's in each district. So yeah, there's probably some cleanup of that language would be helpful in general.
So Mike and Michelle, what would be the recommended path forward? Would you work with the applicant to develop some modifications to the two sections? How do you want to proceed in terms of perhaps introducing banking as a permitted use by condition?
Well, I'll talk first and then you can correct me.
Yeah.
I would recommend that the applicant submit a suggested amended ordinance and allow the township to review it.
Do that.
Sounds good to me.
Everybody go with that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as the county's comment on, applicable residential uses, I do understand the thought behind it and creating walkable destinations for nearby residents. I guess, Claire, what I would say is my concern, if we were to try to move to one of those, like a residential, a restaurant use, I'm actually okay with the auto parts, just given the confined nature of this parcel. I think I'd be more concerned if it was a restaurant and the jockeying and competition for parking spots during peak hours. I could actually see those creating tension between the residential and restaurant use or something like that. So I understand creating walkable communities in this confined configuration. I'd be actually a little concerned with introducing that. I don't know if anybody else has thoughts. Dave Goodwin, you're our expert on these types of things.
I too understand the comment. I mean, it's AutoZone's not something any resident is going to need very often, but AutoZone is great when you want something with limited parking. AutoZone in a mattress store.
Got enough mattress stores here.
Yeah, but and to Matt, to your point, it fits because they have limited parking and they don't even need the parking that they have, generally speaking. So that helps.
Gotcha. I assume Stephanie's not there, so we don't have any additional comments from McMahon. Is that correct?
Yeah, I discussed their primary concern, Manus, and that's what we were talking about, the separation of the driveway. So we do intend on providing some additional traffic analysis data, which she has not reviewed yet.
So I guess my only pushback on that, Rick, is I understand you'd like to focus us on the traffic count, but the suitability of the location in anticipation of future development across the street and how those two should be aligned, I think is a matter for the planning commission to understand. We can't just view this being developed in isolation. So ultimately, I'll want to continue to understand where everyone from a traffic standpoint, including the township's traffic engineer, thinks two opposing entry points should best be aligned, because that's going to be our reality at some point, probably in the not too distant future.
I agree with you, Manus. I think the two have to be looked at in conjunction with one another, the traffic data and the potential for how it would be developed across the street. Just so you're aware, we did actually look at that site and kind of made an analysis as to how possibly that would develop if it's ever developed, you know, where the commercial pads would probably end up on that property versus residential uses. So there is some compatibility with where we have provided the entrance to where we think it makes sense on the street, tract across the street. So we'll try to summarize that to the planning commission a little better with some sort of a plan or at least a reference to understand what we were looking at.
I think that would be very helpful. And you know, your point's not without merit that if pads develop across the front, what would be the logical spot for an entry driveway to the Alabox site relative to those, you know, so many town facing pads. That's exactly the type of stuff I think we need to try to understand.
Okay, makes sense.
So Mike, are we looking for a recommendation for conditional use approval, or do we actually need to work through the language text changes in advance of that? I would assume the latter, but if you tell me it's okay to move ahead on that.
I don't believe
Make the language, right? So yeah, I mean, it's of course up to you and the planning commission to do what you want to do on that. But as far as the actual conditional use process, it is customary to button up the zoning issues first with the zoning hearing board before they go in front of the board of supervisors. So that being said, this won't be on next week's board of supervisors meeting for authorization to advertise because of the items that were brought up in the reviews.
We agree that we can't proceed to a conditional use hearing with a zoning variance need. So
say that again, Rick, I'm sorry.
I would agree that we need to resolve that use issue prior to a conditional use hearing. I don't think we can be in need of zoning relief and go to the conditional use hearing. So I agree with that.
Yeah, you'll just get jammed up.
So we have some other things to work on. So I think that's what we'll do. Hopefully we'll have traffic data, somewhat of an analysis as to why we put the access where it is, why it makes sense, or possibly look at shifting it like Manus mentioned. And we'll be back.
Rick, real quick, these 2 stories they have down here, where's the floodplain up there? How far is the floodplain from that?
Floodplain is not the term I would use. There is water that flows on this property. It is actually this little basin here, which has a very small orifice that drains out onto our property, which created the feature that you see. It basically runs through here. We did do calculations and we submitted them to a CKS in conjunction with the grading permit that shows how far the water spreads. And anywhere water flows, you can calculate. It's not the fact that you can calculate it doesn't define it as a floodplain. I could calculate the flow along Quarry Road, for example. But it is a fairly narrow strip that runs right through here. It does hit these 2 units though. So that if it's determined to be floodplain, it would affect those 2 units. The driveway would just be a crossing and then it goes up to the basin. It's nowhere near any of these. So they're not in. None of these units are in danger of being flooded or anything like that. It's not that kind of a situation. If it's determined to not be floodplain, we would handle it with conventional stormwater management issues like you would do. It also gives us more flexibility to how we deal with the whole situation here with the
Yeah,
the
I was
existing
more
pond
looking at it.
and so.
I do admire articulate people, Rick, and the fact that it's not a floodplain, it's just water that flows. I'll remember that for a while. That's good.
Well, another way to say it, if anywhere that water flows is considered to be floodplain, it would basically be on every roadside ditch and every curb line that exists in the township. So it would be difficult to do much of anything at that point.
Fair enough. Anybody else have any other questions?
It was always 40 years driving by there, it's either frozen in the winter or a good rainstorm, that little abutment dam would overflow onto the street.
Right.
And across the street into that little area. It was never anything that was dry. So is there a spring in there somewhere that keeps it full of water?
Possibly. I mean, I didn't investigate it to that degree. There could be a spring. It's not the drainage area. I can tell you that is keeping the water in that pond. There's no water in the channel or the low area that feeds the pond. So it's not coming from that. So yeah, it could be a spring that sits there.
I never saw it dry.
Yeah. Well, a spring doesn't constitute a floodplain either. So that wouldn't change my opinion. And if you look on the other side of Quarry Road, obviously the drainage area gets bigger and bigger. It really doesn't form a channel over there either. I mean, you can see where the water flows. It's a low area, but it becomes a defined channel much further into that, where there's much more drainage area than there exists here. The little structure that's on the Alabach tract is an erosion control structure that was put in conjunction with the conservation district, actually. And if it was a floodplain, they couldn't have put that there either. So. All right, I won't mention anything else about floodplain tonight.
We'll talk about it at land development, Rick. Great.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Anything from you guys? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Next agenda item, I believe, is 355, Mike. Am I correct?
Yep, it is. 355 Hampton Avenue. The revised plan regarding the version of the building.
Good evening, Kristen Pianzio from Hamburg, Rubin, Mullen, Maxwell, and Lupin. I'm here with John Fiore from Velocity and Lindsay Brandlinger from Bowler. We're here as a courtesy to show you a change in the building, which was not reflected on the plans that were approved. We do have a preliminary final land development approval that the board voted on in April, and we're just revising the plans now in furtherance of that approval. Staff thought it was prudent for us to come in and at least show you what's going on with the building so that it's no surprise to anyone. So if anyone's familiar with the old Nationwide building, it has a center courtyard. We call it the donut hole of the building. Part of the building coverage calculations and the impervious coverage calculations that were approved included the filling of the donut hole. Unfortunately, the graphic remained like this on the plan. So there was a little confusion when the building permit application came in, but the calculations were accounted for. There are also interior renovations being done to the building. Just to let you know, about 35,000 square feet are being removed in order to open up the floors to get some height. So the building square footage is going down. Again, all reflected in the building and impervious coverage. So staff thought it would be nice for us to come in and share that information with you, and that is why I'm here.
So Kristen, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second, just to advise the members. So I spoke with Mike at some length today, and the advice we've been given is that the applicant does not need to resubmit for approval. What I'm going to say is, I think the plan submission as previously done was sloppy. I understand that the math included filling in of the donut hole, but the graphic did not. And I also believe the note on the plan indicated there would not be material changes to the site design and the existing building. So at the very least, it was unclear. I understand we don't have to take a vote and therefore we won't tonight, but I'll encourage all the members, and I think there's been a lot of email over the last couple of days about this site. When we did review it and ultimately approve it, we gave feedback to the client about what we expected to see. So since it is in front of us, everyone is free to share those concerns. We'll record those comments, and when it goes to the Board of Supervisors, it won't include a vote since we're not asked for one, but it'll absolutely include any comments the members have with regard to concerns about the current status of the site. So that's where we'll land and how we'll move forward. Go ahead, Kristen.
I have nothing further.
Nothing has changed with regard to access, right? Last time we talked about.
Nothing has changed at all. Nothing at all.
Still about pushing all the traffic out to 115 and push out the back.
It's the same plan you saw, same plan that was approved. The only change is to the building.
So Kristen, when you were in before, and I appreciate that you've now revised the plans, I believe that the Planning Commission at great length asked you to work with the Trail Commission to figure out the appropriate spot for the trails as well as the pedestrian crossing, and to work that to the satisfaction of the Trail Committee, and which includes our transportation consultant. My understanding is that hasn't been resolved, or it has been resolved, but you haven't updated the plans to reflect that. Where do we stand with that request?
The approval resolution required us to do a separate trail plan submission to work with the township consultant, meaning your engineer and traffic engineer, to have that reviewed by your, hang on, I'm going to quote the language.
Park board and then trail committee.
And yeah.
And then back to the board for final approval.
The Township Park Board, the Trail Committee, and ultimately by the Board of Supervisors. So in furtherance of that condition, a site meeting was took place a number of weeks ago with all the appropriate people and concerned parties, and a trail plan submission has been made. I understand the Trail Plan Committee does not meet until the end of July. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so that process is moving.
Okay. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
The concerns from the park board, but I guess I haven't seen the actual trail.
Actually, I was given the park board preliminary draft minutes. They had their meeting last night, and there was concern at the park board level regarding access or the trail.
But we're not discussing the trail.
Access out to 113 and crossing at 113 rather than mid block, and then also from Maple Avenue up to the private pathway that they have on site.
We weren't invited to the park board meeting. We don't know about this park board meeting. We weren't present to present at the park board meeting. That's not the subject of our appearance here tonight. I'm confused.
I was just given the update from the park board meeting in accordance with the resolution that had to be reviewed by the park board. So that's what they commented on. I mean, I can go further, but
what did they actually review them?
They reviewed the applicant submitted the plan a couple of days ago.
Okay.
For the new park. I'm sorry, the new trail.
So this is plan where it's.
I have no idea what they reviewed. We just submitted the application knowing that the trail committee was meeting at the end of July. We were informed we would go to the trail committee first. I didn't know anything about a park board committee meeting last night.
So Kristen, I'll give you my comment for the minutes and for the record is that we're not entirely sure why you're here tonight either. So I'll express my confusion as to why you're appearing before us. And I'll leave that to the Board of Supervisors and the solicitor to clarify. I will express that I have concern based on the feedback I've seen over the last couple of days that a path to resolution on the trail and the Oak Drive crossing isn't looking like it's moving towards resolution. So I'd encourage the Board of Supervisors to understand the status of that. That's my only comment.
With all due respect, Manis, that feedback that you're getting is not feedback that I'm getting. So in order to work together, I need to have the feedback that we can discuss it and have the collaboration that I expected at the trail committee meeting, as was described to me. So love to hear the feedback, would love to discuss it, come up with a resolution, but I can't if I'm not a party to that.
Fair enough. The parties that are involved, I've worked with for over 10 years. They're usually fairly engaged. So I share with you the confusion as to why there's not better dialogue. Our consultant as well as the park board are usually good at that. So yeah, I'd encourage you to understand why you're not getting that level of dialogue from those parties.
Yeah. We're open to it. Of course, you know, we're always here to work with you.
Anybody else have any comments? Okay, thanks for coming in, Kristen.
Thank you. Good to see you guys.
Proposed temporary sign ordinance. Mike, you've presented that to us in the past. You're going to share with us again?
Yeah, so finally I've been able to take another look at that. Because one of the ordinances that really needed to be cleaned up because of more recent issues with the temporary signs throughout the township. So what you have in front of you is the latest iteration going through the amendment process with the temporary signs has been challenging. So it began with smaller ordinance amendments to try to address what were apparent temporary sign issues at the time, like a year and a half ago or so. And then it switched over to a content neutral approach, which was based on the county's model temporary sign or model sign ordinance. Based on that model, and it was not appealing in the general sense. It wasn't an appealing ordinance amendment according to comments received at the Planning Commission and for supervisors. So we went back to the drawing board and kind of went back to what we originally were proposing, which was not content neutral. And then so we threw that up against the wall to see if it stuck, and it didn't. Once it went back to Jim Garrity's office, they had comments that it wasn't content neutral enough. And so now we're back, but now what we've done is we've taken the model ordinance, which from the township's perspective, again, seemed to allow too many signs that the township really didn't want. So we really pared it down, tried to keep it as simple as possible. And that's what you see in front of you today. So it's content neutral, and it's very much pared down as compared to the original content neutral ordinance amendment that you had a while ago. So it's, in a nutshell, it would allow what's called limited duration signs. Okay, that would be allowed for 1 year, and you need to submit a permit application for it. And the size of that could be the size of a piece of plywood. Okay, and so that was basically because typically what you see if you want to erect a temporary sign is you'll go to a hardware store, buy a piece of plywood, paint it, and put it up. And so this would basically allow what we already see in the township today. But the enforceability of this, since it's in the ordinance, they would need to apply and pay for a permit every year if they wanted to continue to have something like this up, and they would need to comply with the location requirements and the number of signs. Right now, there's really no ordinance that allows us to enforce something like this. So there's that, so limited duration signs. Then we have temporary signs, and that's largely unchanged the way that the township currently treats temporary signs. This would actually put temporary signs in the ordinance, whereas our current ordinance does not regulate the size or the number of temporary signs the way that it's strictly read. So this would allow temporary signs to be as big as 24 square feet, which is again what we currently enforce, and would also allow temporary signs to be erected without a permit. Okay, and then you would be able to erect more than one temporary sign as long as it did not exceed the 24 square foot maximum. Okay. Both the temporary sign and the limited duration sign, you can have two of if your property is big enough, which is greater than 5 acres and has at least 400 feet of frontage. You'd have to be able to have two. Okay. Then the rest of the ordinance is okay. So we have personal expression signs, which is very important for the freedom of speech, constitutionality. There would be, there was discussion about this one before. These are supposed to be basically limitless. You're not supposed to restrict it, but we're allowed to restrict the size and location. Okay. And so the size would be no bigger than 3 square feet, which is your typical 1.5 by 2 foot yard sign that you see popping up all over the place. We would not enforce it unless the personal expression signs exceeded that. Okay, so if, for instance, there was during political season, if there was a political sign that went up on a piece of plywood, they would be required to get a limited duration sign. If they claim that it's personal expression, we could enforce the fact that they can't be that big because personal expression sign cannot be bigger than 3 square feet. So there's ways to enforce these temporary signs through this ordinance. But that's the gist of it. There's other details with signs that would not require a permit, which would be religious, civil, philanthropic, historical, or educational organizations. But again, not exceeding 4 square feet, so they can't just put up willy-nilly whatever they want. They would need to submit an application for permits for like special events, things of that nature still. But anything 4 square feet or less, those types of organizations can do what they want. Directional signs would also not require a permit. Incidental signs, including window signs, holidays, seasonal decorations, that sort of thing. That's the gist.
For a limited duration sign, I didn't see an exception, and it may not be in this, maybe it's somewhere else where it gives the exception for a sign for the purpose of advertising a property for lease or for rent or for sale, which is typically a limited duration sign, and they're typically 32 square feet or less. But typically, find in most townships there's an exception for the permit as long as it's meets the size requirement. But with this, would that type of sign have to then come in and get a permit?
You mean real estate signs?
Yeah.
So I think our current ordinance excludes real estate signs from needing to meet the sign ordinance, and so I think we should look into that also, because we see that a lot where
There still should be a limit of the size, because if I think there should be an exception for it, but as long as it's, I think 32 is rough, or 35 sometimes is what I see. But
35 square feet,
yeah, which just that allows for a 5 by 7. But to it, because you don't want somebody putting up that real estate sign that's just huge and saying they can do it because, you know, it's an exception.
Right.
But the
You're just trying to get it.
church barbecue sign,
Yeah,
firehouse, barbecue sign, certain time of the year.
Right, so those would be exempt
There's a big.
because they're civil.
Where does the mattress sale sign fall into that you stick in the ground? What's that? Okay, so
That would be removed and placed into the trunk of my car and into the dumpster.
is that a limited duration?
Yeah, so those, the signs that you see popping up within the rights of way by companies who don't even have place in Lower Southbridge Township, like
Up by your house.
or junk removal or something like that, those we because they're just not permitted. Now, if that property owner wanted to put up signs like that, they can go through this process. But off premises commercial signs would not be allowed.
The weekend, the new development this way that pops up on Friday nights and are down Sunday nights.
Right, so like there's really no way to enforce those because
Typically all the WB home. Really.
right. Well, we can't enforce content. So yeah, though there are some that go up for the open houses that we just can't enforce because there's nobody here.
Yeah.
And
That's why they put it up on Friday.
right.
But I think Dave Goodman's point of it's fine if you're going to exclude real estate from a duration standpoint, Mike, but I think size is still something we should regulate and enforce.
Okay.
I'm just looking at the ordinance now, and real estate signs are not a temporary sign, that's something separate. And it says that a real estate sign shall not exceed 8 square feet for residential properties carried by a single broker, or 20 square feet for residential properties carried by one or more cooperating brokers, and 5 feet of sign height.
Okay, so that's our current ordinance. So the challenge is that we can put certain types of signs in an excluded category, not requiring permit. But once we want to start regulating the size of it, we can't say real estate signs can only be 35 square feet. We have to give it a label and put it under the category of like a temporary sign or a limited duration sign. Claire, do you have any thought on where the real estate signs fall under in the model?
It would probably be limited duration, because usually more than 30 days.
They are, however, our limited duration would require a permit.
Right, so I think the permit piece is permits required with the exception of real estate signs, still need to meet all the other requirements.
I see what you're doing. Okay.
Yeah. Limited duration, temporary signs allow municipalities to regulate non-permanent signs requiring longer display times, such as those containing real estate information, without having to regulate the non-permanent signs according to their. So in that case, the model would limit the size, height, and number of both limited duration and temporary signs that can be displayed on the property. So I think in this case, it sounds like real estate would be considered duration.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of the length of yeah, but handling the permitting.
we just put them up.
Yeah, right. No. So do you think then we should increase the size from 32 square feet to 30 square feet? Because this would be all encompassing for, of course, all limited duration signs that ain't put up.
Not really, I think 30 is probably fine.
Okay. So is that understandable? Is that clear enough? Then these would be considered limited duration. Is that, are we in agreement in that?
But that sounds like,
Yeah, it sounded like the number one, maybe reworded, a permit is required for each limited duration sign, with the exception of. And then figure out what the verbiage should be, of real estate signs related to that particular parcel.
Mhm.
1 year.
1 year. Any other thoughts on the rest of the draft?
I'm good. I mean, a lot of the distinctions are driven by public policy. I think that resides with the Board of Supervisors. Our issue is really more about duration, size, and enforceability. So that'd be my question to the members. Are we good with that?
I'm sure with that big rat thing. Stands out in front of a building and says, we're protesting.
I'm
That's
sure they'll
different.
get a permit.
That's different.
That's the police department. Not that they won't be allowed to, do it, but it's a different, that's an event. So.
Hey, Mike, I guess one question I do have, what about banners? I can think of a certain commercial developer in the township who has gotten pretty good at hanging banners on the facades of buildings. How are those regulated?
So this currently, no, and if they are, it's very foggy and conflicting. This would be the way to enforce something like banners, because banners are temporary signs.
Okay.
They would not be allowed to, they would need to get a permit if the banner is up for more than 30 days. Right, if it's more than 24 square feet, which I would assume it would be.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it might not be considered a banner. It's not large enough. Then it would be a limited duration sign. They would need to pull a permit.
Okay, I think that's good. So Mike, what do you need from us? I mean, are you going to make another turn of the document, or?
Yeah, so the plan from here on out is that I'm going to incorporate your comments and then take this to the Board of Supervisors for discussion only. Hear their comments, and then bring it back to the Planning Commission after we think that we've addressed everything. Because there's really a lot to think about, a lot of different circumstances. We want to make sure we get this right the first time, so we don't need to keep going back to the drawing board. And then ultimately, I want to bring a clean copy for the Planning Commission that you guys can actually make a recommendation for adoption, and then move forward with adoption of the ordinance.
Sounds good. Okay. So I think the next agenda item is county reviews. Claire? Oh, I'm sorry.
Hold up.
I just want, since you mentioned banner flags, I just wanted to say in the model, since you're looking at that, banners are limited in terms of size, height, and number of property, but they are also limited to the time, so no more than 30 consecutive days, up to twice per year.
So it sounds like banners are kind of regulated in the model like a temporary sign.
Yeah.
Okay, my only thought is that typically they're bigger than our temporary sign, which would be 24 square feet. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if is the Planning Commission comfortable with keeping them limited duration signs for up to a year, permit required, or limit them. Yeah, I don't even know. I guess the only other option would be to increase the size of the temporary sign, which I don't know if we want to do that.
Keep them small.
Keep them small. Okay.
I can look more closely at this later on and see if there are specific regulations for banners subcategory under temporary signs, and maybe that.
But the overall intent, I guess, is do not not allow more signs. Because I think that was loud and clear message that the township planning commission and the board didn't want too many signs, so.
What, example, the flag hanging from the back of the townhomes on Fox's buildings. Was there for a week or so, maybe 2 weeks.
Oh, big American flag.
The big American flag.
Oh, that's just allowed. That would be exempt.
That's like a banner almost.
The American flag.
American flag.
Yeah, we
Are you against America's?
I'm against the 20th flag banner hung on the side of a building in a residential area.
so that would
Kind of against that.
be considered
That was a huge flag.
signs or emblems of religious, civil, philanthropic, historical, or educational, governmental organizations not on there, but I believe the model ordinance excludes that in a way.
Not knowing the exact stuff that's in here, but I would imagine so, yeah, that seems like it would be.
Okay.
It's, I mean, I'm not saying we should go there, but it's interesting and hopefully it never becomes topic. What if that wasn't an American flag? What if that was another country's flag?
Or a Confederate flag.
Or a Confederate flag? Yeah, then you get all, I mean,
Right.
we can't have rules for all that kind of stuff, but
Mhm.
that would fill the room.
It would. And that's what makes it difficult to bake it into the ordinance. Because when you exempt governmental emblems, American flags, any flag, then it makes it difficult. So in a general sense, and I think we might even need to add verbiage in this temporary ordinance regarding the exemption of governmental flags like that. I don't think it had a size limitation, if I remember correctly in the model. But we'll look into that. Yeah,
All right, are we good?
Yep.
All right. Claire?
Yeah. So I sent, can you hear me okay? I'm trying to project. Can you hear me okay now?
You're a little choppy compared to everybody else, but I think I can hear you right now.
Able, that isn't picked up on the microphone very well. Oh, and that microphone's not on.
Okay.
You want to move over? Move over.
Yeah, I'll try to speak loudly.
Okay, you sound good.
Okay, so I sent a memo that I had sent previously in May, and so I just resent the material. The memo summarizes the most recent draft of the district. And looking back at the minutes, and we haven't discussed this since the meeting in March. So to refresh everyone's memory, at that last meeting where we talked about edits, we talked about historic structures or structures built for a certain year and conditional uses. So the main changes that were made to this version of the district were, as I outlined in this memo, deleting entirely the section 164-70.3 standards and criteria for conditional uses, and that includes the removal of specific conditions and general conditions for conditional uses. It's duplicative with standards that are general in the zoning ordinance for the township, and doesn't articulate anything that would be elsewhere in the zoning. And in addition to that, some of the criteria that had been listed in that specific conditions for conditional uses were just moved to the bonus criteria for buildings that were constructed before 1940 and which would be preserved as a bonus option. That was the biggest change that we made, or that I made since the last meeting. see the edits. It's a bunch of crossed out text on pages 5 of the document with track changes. 5, 6, and part of 7. And on page 7, under setbacks, the front yard setbacks were refined further. Mike and I were discussing this to really solidify what the final front yard setback should be. So it's requiring an average of the front yard setbacks for buildings within 300 feet of the property line. And then they would, if that doesn't apply, then they would have a minimum of 15-foot setback and a maximum of 25 feet. And so that, I think that's all stuff that we had covered before, but I don't think there are any changes for that. And then there's something else that I wanted to talk about, and I brought a handout that I also emailed to Mike a little bit ago. So I didn't send it out before the meeting. And that is related to building frontage occupation, which is something that we had talked about in the previous meetings. And I just wanted to provide some illustrations to show how it works. Very, very rough calculations from examples in the township. And this would apply only to properties that have multiple buildings on the lot. So we have seen a couple of proposed developments come in where they've proposed multiple buildings, townhouses, for example, on one building lot or one property. And so in order for this building frontage to apply, all the buildings would have to have frontage on the street, and there would be a minimum frontage percentage of that lot that would have to be met in the case of multiple buildings on that lot. So this just describes the importance or what the purpose of the building frontage occupation is to do, and it provides an example. So these are illustrations from Lower Merion's code, and there's also one from Central North Florida. They both have frontage occupation as standards in the zoning. This is the illustration that's right there is for 100% frontage occupation. And that is not to say this is appropriate for Lower Southford. This is just a visual example of what that would look like. That's more appropriate in a town center type area. In a village district setting, something that's closer to 50% would probably be more appropriate. And if you scroll down, Mike, there's some other illustrations in this. So that illustration there shows a single house on a lot, and that's about 50%. And then and then the one on the very bottom shows a larger building, again, not the same as what we would see here, but just showing how there's a public space, little courtyard cut out into that front of the building. That would not be counted against that building frontage occupation because that would still be activated space. And the intent is to keep the street frontage active to a certain degree. And then if we scroll down further, these are just some aerial images, street view images from some properties that are in Lower Southford, showing, again, very rough calculations of what that would approximately be. About 25% building frontage along the property line, and then one below, and that's measuring the property line in the front, and then the building width also. And then below that there are two more examples of properties that one has 30% building frontage and one has 60% building coverage. They're about the same size building, but the lots are one's about twice the size of the other. And then if you scroll down to the very last one, these are the two properties that I took a look at as just examples of what we would be looking at.
I was going to ask if this would have helped in Burnfield, Claire.
Yes, it would have, and that's part of the reason why we thought about this as an option. So the reason why I brought up the front setbacks as well is because the building would have to be brought up to that setback line in order to meet that building frontage occupation requirement. And then the Burnfield one, clearly the buildings are set back behind the parking, so it wouldn't meet that whatever the standard would be in the space. And then the one on the right, I quickly measured it out, and that would be about 45% frontage occupation, because there are gaps in between the buildings, but it still occupies, you know, a fair amount of the frontage. And the driveway is on a separate lot. So I was just, you know, I provided this as a way to explain this concept since we had talked about it, but I hadn't brought any visuals, so hopefully it's helpful to see how it plays out. And in the draft, I put on page 8, the minimum frontage occupation would be 60%. That might be a bit high. So, you know, taking a look at some of these other properties in the township, perhaps 50% might be more appropriate. I can take a closer look, but with the mind in mind that that one's close to 50% and the other one's close to 30%, probably at least 50% would be as good. Would be a
I like the concept. I think I assume there would be a minimum and a maximum. But you know, the examples that you give here, you know, 28% is too low. The 45 on the right-hand side doesn't look, you know, I'm not sure that's too low. So I would think, you know, somewhere in the 40-45% for a min, and then, you know, some sort of threshold maximum. You know, I don't know what the right number is. I'd look for you to give us some recommendations on that. Anybody else have a reaction to the concept of frontage occupation?
The minimum makes sense. I guess maximum though, I'm just trying to think about how that would work.
Yeah, I guess if you don't want too many buildings that, as you can see in some of the other examples, like if you have a narrow lot and a building that take up the majority of that, and that would be a higher percentage. So trying to think offhand what kind of areas you might have where that would be the case currently. I didn't see it anything like that when I was looking.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the sample, because if you real narrow lot, I mean, you still obviously have your side yard setbacks, things like that you need to abide by. So you really can't have, I mean, I assume the goal is not to have some crazy monstrosity of a building that just fronts a very long span of property. I guess, is there any property size minimums that this applies to? Or no?
That they can be within 50 feet in length.
Okay.
So you would automatically have that requirement. But if there are multiple that are close together, I guess would be the
because the goal of this is to try to bring as much as we can forward, right? So the min I understand to accomplish that. I'm just trying to think why we would want a max, or what a max would prohibit, other than them building further into the lot, back into the lot, right?
So the trend with recent land developments, the two that Claire has up right now, and also Creekside at Mainland, which is zone BC. So the trend is to be able, developers like to use the entire site. And so this would emphasize, of course, the minimum the trend is not to bring everything to the street. If you remember,
this would help us with that.
This would help us with the min, but I don't think, at least with the current trend, there's no need for a maximum.
Right.
A matter of fact, if you remember, you guys had discussions with the developer at Creekside regarding, yeah, turning and, you know, with that one unit, that one building unit that, that fronts onto, Mainland Road. And so there was negotiation there just to make that happen.
Yeah.
Whereas before they wanted more off toward the back of the sites. Yeah, I don't know if there's a need for maximum.
Yeah.
Or not.
So like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that there are probably enough other protections in place that it might not be necessary to have a maximum.
Yeah, I agree. I think, as Brad said, you know, you got side yard setbacks, and, you know, if there's a driveway, you know, if they can create back, you know, rear yard access, great. We actually encourage that, but if they can't, they're going to need to move a driveway in there as well. So I think a maximum is probably unnecessary, but I think a rational minimum in the village commercial, because, you know, in other districts, we actually want to see to some of the development get pushed back from the road to create a rural sight line. Village commercial is one where we prefer to actually see a reasonable portion of the development take place up near the road frontage to create the village feel and look. So, you know, I think we'd look for a recommendation from you, Claire, on what should be the minimum that we would put in, but I do like the concept. The other thing I would ask you to see if you can work up for us and bring back is, I think I talked with Mike and maybe a few of the folks last time, maximum building height in the township is, and I just found this out, and I apologize for not being more aware of this, is the maximum building height is calculated, Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, the midpoint between the eave and the peak of the roof. So if you make the peak taller, you move the midpoint up. And that's where the calculation is based. What it does is it actually allows the building to actually be taller than what is written in our ordinance as the maximum, because I thought I always thought it was the top of the top. It's actually the midpoint. And as a consequence, if you look, a lot of builders are going to truss construction, and that peak is getting really high. Even that mainland development, you know, I drive past there sometimes. They're not completely out of whack with the buildings around them, but they're close to being out of whack. So I'd actually like to call the max. Like, let's define how tall can the building be, and that's to the peak, and it can't be taller than that.
And then on the second page of the memo that I sent, I gave 2 examples of other definitions that I found in one from Lower Marion and one for Upper Moreland that I think get at what the issue that you're describing. So the definition from Lower Marion for building height is the vertical distance from the mean grade to the highest point of the building, excluding permitted appurtenances such as chimneys, authorized elsewhere in this chapter. And then for Upper Moreland, similarly, it's the height of the building shall be measured from the main level of the ground surrounding the building to the highest point of the roof, provided that chimneys, spires, towers, elevator, panels, tanks, and similar projections shall not be included in the height.
So in those, what's the difference between mean grade and main level of ground?
Yeah, they're I think
well, no, I'm just thinking like maybe the good one, because some of those properties go like this. So yeah. Where on that property is starting?
Mean grade is typical.
Yeah.
So about the middle average. Yeah.
Well, I know some ordinances that say that you have to calculate that mean grade by saying what the elevation is at every 10 or 15 feet around the building, because mean grade could mean 2 different things on depending front, back, side to side. So I think that has to be cleared up a little bit.
Yeah, depending on which way the property is.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I like that. If we can define mean grade, and then we define the calculation of the peak as from the mean grade to the highest point, not including chimneys, that starts to get what I thought we were actually doing and recently learned we're not. So I think that would be a good change.
Well, let's just think, what could appurtenances be? They could be elevator shafts too, right? Do you want to define what that is? Can the elevator shaft be a 10 feet tall above the building height? The chimney is not usually that tall, or what else could go on a roof?
Stair tower.
Stair tower, right?
So like with Upper Moreland, they talk about that they'll provide that chimneys, spires, towers, elevators, penthouses, tanks, and similar projections shall
Okay,
not be
good.
included in the height.
Good.
But how, right,
Oh, but
but
then
shall
how
not
do
be
they-
included. So how do you limit that?
They would be
Right. So like the houses in the Gulf that have an elevator, that shaft that protrudes up, what limits how high that can go?
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I typically do see this where these kinds of sections on the roof are permitted above the maximum height. I don't.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
That somebody just doesn't. Not that they would, because
As long as we put
mechanically.
There are regulations regarding cell towers. But aside from that, of course, that's still relevant. Aside from that, nothing would regulate this.
So can you put a cell tower on top of your house?
No, you can't do that. It might look like it. You know, what comes to mind is, if you're familiar with, what township it is, but when you're heading, on 309, southbound 309 Burgies near the,
Bertie Shepherd, that's cool. Hatfield
Township.
Hatfield Township, they actually have a Burgies Electric.
Bertie's Electric. I think it's still Hatfield.
Yeah, so they have an antenna out of their building that is kind of actually unnoticeable. But at night now they light it up, and I think that was somewhat recent. They actually light it up with bright, like a black light looking purple light. It's really pretty, but it's a big tower.
I never noticed that.
Big feature now. Yeah, so that would not be regulated.
Yeah.
Well, can we just say except for chimneys, like the top of the height is the top of the height, excluding chimneys? Just be explicit about what doesn't count.
Yeah, so you're saying what's in Upper Morelands then? To the highest point of the roof, provided that chimneys, spires, towers, elevator, penthouses, tanks, and similar projections shall not be included in the height.
No, I'm saying they all would be included. The only thing that would not be included in the height, I'd say, is chimneys.
Okay.
I think you might do an undue burden on a two-story house with an elevator shaft.
How often does the elevator shaft go higher than the peak of the roof?
I think they all do.
Yeah, Red Rock, they go good ways.
Because to get to that second floor, it needs to protrude up more than what a conventional roof line would support. So they're all the ones that have the pergola at the top is the elevator shaft. Every house that I've seen has an elevator shaft.
And that's how they accommodate the elevator shaft, is the pergola or the cupola?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, so if we did that, I don't know. We could even put elevators in houses. I think the two-story house, though, you probably would still be okay. Because what's our height?
35 feet, I think.
Well, Lower Merion's definition basically gives the advantage, I guess, to the municipality to determine what is a permitted appurtenance. It just gives an example of a chimney. It could also
okay.
be an elevator tower.
Right, so Lower Marion's, I guess, is close to what we're trying to do once we define what the mean grade is, highest part of the building, excluding permitted.
Permitted
Appurtenances like chimneys authorized elsewhere in this chapter.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they have, I don't know if we possibly see if they have something else within the chapter that limits how far a tree from the top of the house.
Where?
In Lower Marion.
Oh,
Definitions or something like that. Yeah, I mean, they authorize them, but I don't know if they limit the
I think so.
the height beyond the peak of the house. I mean, I doubt people are gonna be putting up, chimneys that are 10 foot higher than the peak of the roof.
And that's the enforceability leverage that is nice to have at this level. If the more wordy an ordinance gets, the more that there's only one way to look at it. And so if you allow the elevator shafts to have an exemption, somebody might apply for a building that has an elevator shaft, but part of that same elevator shaft is an expanded part of the building with a little area. I mean, you never know what they come up with sometimes. It's not a traditional elevator shaft, but
Yeah, then you get a rooftop deck and all sorts of crap.
Yeah.
And especially in village commercial, I mean, I get the Lead Rock golf example, but that's a different zoning area. Like I think we can be pretty tight in village commercial, because that's where we're pulling the buildings close to the road to create the village feel. And then the buildings are getting higher. I think it's legitimate to define how high those can be. We can work through the other districts, but I think in this one, it can be pretty straightforward and pretty defined.
All encompassing.
Sounds like the Lower Marion version, which doesn't specify what those projections off the roof might be, and then it would be up to the township to determine that. So that might be the direction that we want to go in, just clarifying how you would define that mean grade.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions or comments for Claire?
I summarized all the changes that were made, so I can bring the updated version next time, but if there are any other at this point, try to integrate those.
If you make those changes, how much more do you think we have in terms of, at this point, are we just confirming all the edits have been captured and do a last look, or do we have more revision reviews to go through?
I don't think that I've copied the solicitor on these emails, and so he hasn't called out anything that would need to have a lot of further discussion. I think that it might be, well, I'll leave it up to you all to determine if I should do a final presentation almost to summarize the edits. I don't think there are any big changes left that we need to go over though. No.
Okay. Yeah, so then I would say maybe, let's look to do a final review and then move this towards, public comment and get it done. Anybody have any other thoughts on that or concerns?
Great.
Yeah.
Good. All right, that was the last agenda item. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Thanks. So Mike, adjourning the meeting, do we stop recording now?
yes, let me stop recording.